Thank you for taking us to the land of sustainable land management, Dr. Morzabayev. It just reminds me how important policies are as we try to make changes on the ground. So at this time, I'd like to invite the speakers to sit at the panel at the front, and we'll take questions from you. Perhaps we'll take one or a couple questions or 3 questions. We'll group them, and they can answer. Sir?
Yes, thanks for an excellent presentation, and I look forward to reading the book. Hi, Alisher, I haven't seen you in several years, so nice to see you. Ephraim, in your presentation, you talked about this 5-to-1 ratio of the cost to the benefits of action and the cost of inaction and so on. I can sort of imagine how you estimated the cost of inaction using the NDVI data and so on. You put some price to that, but could you say a bit more about how you estimated the cost of action? And also, are you assuming that when action is taken, it's 100% effective in ending the land degradation?
Postponing or
Thank you very much for very well documented. I think it's the first time we have, it's correct, such a comprehensive evaluation of the issue. I remember for UNESCO task force, we call it biocultural diversity. And our main purpose is how to disseminate best practices, how to disseminate what technology is available and experiments available. So my first question is, are you aware of technologies either developed and partly applied or new technologies which provided financial support and engineering support, whatever, would solve radically the problem of land degradation? Specifically, for example, can we talk about fertilizer, non-chemical fertilizer, to make them, to enable the small farmers use those fertilizer? Could it prevent land degradation, or could we have a rollout strategy supporting by the World Bank and others? Are we able, based on the technologies you know of today, to prepare a rollout plan? Thank you.
We'll take one more, and then we'll go to the panelists.
Thank you. Excellent presentation, and I think this book is long overdue. I mean, we needed to have this thing a long time ago. On the last slide that was presented, I just want to make a point. I mean, you pointed out, okay, we need to do payment for environmental services, so policies for that, the institution building, and all that sort of stuff. But I'd like to, one thing that I feel it's missing here is that it's what Professor Brown was saying right at the beginning. What we need is that the cost. I mean, what is this costing us? And so then you have those figures and so forth. But I mean, you have these, okay, what are our next steps? But in fact, what we need to do is to convince that Minister of Finance that is going to be able to pass the money to the Ministry of Agriculture to be able to do those things that are on your list. I mean, without doing that, without convincing, without giving that 30-minute spiel to the elevator spiel to the Minister of Finance, we're not going to go. And that's what we've been doing. We've been going round and round. We have these numbers, these studies, but we don't get it to the decision makers.
Should we, Ephraim first?
John, thank you. Thank you for coming. You started this job and then you left behind it, what we were doing. Now, how did we estimate the cost of action? Yeah, is the cost of action like reforestation, for example, for forests that have been cut down? And we estimated, actually using some of the data that you left behind, the Niger, the tree planting program that you had. So we looked at the cost of planting those trees, protecting them, and everything. And we ended up having the cost of reforestation and other programs which we are involved in this case. And also for cropland, it was using the integrated soil fertility management, which is regarded as sustainable land management. Now, of course, the question was we were taking the cost of action was just taking the actual cost that the farmers, the land users, I shouldn't use the word farmers, because if you say that, you're just limiting the biome to only cropland and livestock, and which is not the case in this case. So the land users, they have to take that cost, but then the benefits are for the carbon sequestration and others, the ecosystem services are for everybody. And for that one, the benefits, which you didn't ask, but I can answer that, we used what we call value transfer. There was 3,000 case studies that were done doing by ecosystem service evaluation. Those studies were done, and we used those numbers to be able to attach value to the cost, the cost or the benefit of the ecosystem services that we have around. Then there was a question about dissemination. This is a very important question. We didn't have a lot of time to provide a lot of information, but I can tell you a story of a study that we did in Uganda, Nigeria. We were asking the extension agents, what messages do you give to your farmers? The first one was improved seeds, followed by inorganic fertilizer, followed by agrochemicals. Only 1%. We are talking about organic soil fertility management, meaning that the teachers, the people who are supposed to know, don't know the sustainable land management. That's a very big problem. And Alicia had a presentation showing that access to extension services is very helpful in addressing, in adoption of sustainable land management. Now, we are finding there is a very big problem of information. The farmers don't have very good information about the sustainable land management. And the second thing is, there was a study which Wei, I think she's in the room. We were asking the people about their knowledge about ecosystem services. The biomes that they keep on their farm, do they know that they have these benefits? One of the most interesting things was that a lot of farmers don't know what the bees are doing. And the issue of pollination and all that, very few of them, they had knowledge about this. So there is a very big problem of knowledge, and that one is one of the things that we can use to be able to achieve sustainable land management. The farmers, the land users, the word farmers should go away. The land users should know. They should have that knowledge, and we have that problem. And the investment that need to be directed to, among other things, is about the knowledge of the farmers themselves. I'll let Alicia answer the question related to PS.
Yes, yes. In addition, also to what Ephraim said regarding your questions about disseminating these technologies, availability of these technologies, I would like to refer you also to the so-called WOCAT database, WOCAT, with the University of Bern. They collected, this is an international program which collects exactly information data on this kind of sustainable land management technologies from different locations of the world where they were tried and have proven to be successful. Of course, technology is very important, but technology alone would not be sufficient. Even if there is perfect technology, it may not it may not be sufficient to address land degradation unless there is also favorable institutional and policy context. So in the book, what we are calling for is a package of measures involving both technological solutions, but also institutional, which go accompanied by institutional and policy actions. And thank you very much for your comment regarding importance of reaching out to decision makers, especially finance ministers and others. That's one of the also key purposes of our work. We have this book, but also we have a series of policy briefs which where we try to explain to decision makers, policy makers, and also civil society in general the importance of investing into sustainable land management, that the returns are very high, and many of our authors, co-authors of these chapters, are going to have similar events, launch events in their own countries to their own policymakers. So we hope that this will also give some kind of more information about these findings to people who make decisions on this.
Dr. Lal?
These are economic questions. I really do not have much to add, except in the U.S., as you know, Conservation Reserve Program was very successful because the farmers are paid for retiring the land. The cost varies over time, but that was very important. I think $300 billion cost I think it's an underestimate. How do you include the cost of algal bloom from land degradation to Lake Erie and other water? How do you include the cost of dead zones? These are some of the very difficult off-site damages, which are loss of biodiversity. If those microbes are gone, how do you add their cost into it? So I think the hidden costs are not easy to estimate. Therefore, I would say this $300 billion loss is probably an underestimate. And there are some other way. I would also like to mention if, for example, carbon sequestration through land restoration becomes a very important issue, how do you compensate farmers for that? Do you compensate them because they have reduced erosion from 10 ton per hectare to 1 ton? I do not think that's a proper way to do that, because the benefits of land restoration, such as carbon sequestration, such as biodiversity, such as increase in use efficiency of inputs, are very difficult to account for. Let me give a very good example. If you go to Chicago Climate Exchange today and find out the cost of carbon sequestration is 10 cents a ton of CO2. Is that the real cost? Obviously not. So there's a societal cost and economic cost. Societal cost would be the inherent value of carbon to ecosystem services. And we estimate that what goes into sequestering carbon to land restoration, for example, crop residue return, which small farmers cannot, nitrogen required to do that, humidification, phosphorus, and many other things. The actual cost of building carbon in soil from residue is about $120 a ton of C. So, can you compensate that to farmers somehow? Even if you take the value in Morogoro, where a friend and I worked with several students, about, let's say, 300 kilogram per hectare per year of carbon. That translates into $16 per acre per year. If we can compensate farmers for that price, that will reverse everything very quickly. But where will that price come from? Who will pay for it? That's a very important question. And the other part of transfer of technology really is, how do you translate knowledge into action? I think this question that has become to restore degraded lands by agroforestry or by erosion control, I think at least in the context of sub-Saharan Africa, I can cite you books going back to 50s. But they were never translated into action. They still are not translated into action.
Okay,
The question is, how do you motivate the policymaker to do that?
Thank you. The gentleman over there had a question in blue sweater. You're okay. Okay.
So could you maybe expand a little bit on the methods to improve land, and also maybe, I don't know if you've considered, say on grasslands, the holistic management of grazing herds, and maybe also, combining crops with pastures, just increasing diversity in general.
I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself, perhaps, before you ask your question.
Yes, your maps were very large scale, and they went by very fast. But I saw in central India what I thought was kind of a strange thing, at least for an American. It looked like the government was in degradation and the land was improving, which would be opposite of what I would predict. And I'm just, if we would address that, if it was to why that happens, and is that replicable? I mean, is there something in there that we can learn from that particular anomaly?
We'll take one more in the back, and then we'll continue the rest.
Thank you. Brian Greenberg with Interaction. I wanted most to applaud the authors for calling attention to this under-recognized problem and for your constructive suggestions about how to respond. But I wanted to suggest perhaps some additional emphasis that might give us some policy steps ahead. And it would be first to differentiate, and you may have in the book, and I'm innocent of the book and look forward to familiarizing myself with it, but there are two pretty distinct degradation pathways in industrialized, primarily northern, high external input agriculture and the kind of intensification that takes place in often subsistence or marginal for the market, low external input conditions. They both generate different negative outcomes. And it leads me to just ask you the extent to which you feel we need to also come to grips directly with the concept of negative externalities. Dr. Nkonya, you mentioned that it's good to provide farmers with incentives on the positive externalities side, but right now, the costs of degradation are not adequately represented in value chains or through the farm to fork to consumer subsidy, essentially, that we enjoy because we're not paying for degradation. And so it seems to me that we need to internalize those costs in our food, which is inevitably going to drive up the cost of food, but appropriately so. And we need inevitably to put some restraints on the ability to externalize costs of production from the private individual to the public sector. And that leads me to propose to you that in addition to Malthus and Boserup, it would be very helpful to bring in the agricultural involution side of things. From Clifford Geertz is obviously the creator of that, and a much more acute understanding of the fact that these challenges are exacerbated by the primary frame that we've had for agriculture, which is that it's a production challenge. To meet the world's food needs, we need to simply produce more, and technologies which tend to do that, the high external inputs, are the best ways to achieve that. And Dr. Lal, thank you so much for calling attention to the dietary changes and the other changes, all of you, that could help to facilitate that. So first, it really is how to internalize the negative externalities, and then how to understand the degradation pathways and the many points along the way that offer opportunities for more sustainable farming systems, so that we don't simply fall for idealistic platitudes like sustainable intensification. We
Thank
don't
you.
know
Thank you for the
Thank
question.
you.
I think we'll turn the floor to the panelists, please.
Let me answer the first and last question, and Alicia will deal with the question regarding India. First of all, I need to add to my answer to John. I forgot mentioning that in looking at the cost of action, we also looked at the opportunity cost. If you plant a tree, you're going to wait for 6 years before you can harvest the rewards. And you are not planting your crops that you deforested to plant the crops. So we take the opportunity cost of not harvesting crops for those 6 years until when you start harvesting the benefits of the forest that you have planted. So we also took the opportunity cost into the cost of action. Now, going to the question regarding the grassland and cropland when they are all planted together, what we did was just look at, isolate the areas that are for grassland grazing biomass. It's called a grazing biomass. That's the data that we got from IFPRI. And those grazing biomass, we are not including the crops in that. But in a cropland area, we were taking care of the livestock that feed on the grassland, the crop residues. We took that into account. And you can read it. There's a chapter on livestock, and that's the one that we are explaining very well on how we developed this model. But in short, we did not have a situation where we had the crops and grassland all put together. We did not have that. We did not have that complication. Going to Brian, I think well, our comments are very good. The questions also are very important. The externalities, the negative ones. Our study will not look at those ones. We are only look at the positive ones. And we are going to, take into account the ag involution that you talked about. That's something which is very important. Yes, there is a very, very big difference between high-income countries and low-income countries when it comes to the nature of land degradation. And in cases where we had, in high-income countries, we were also seeing cropland degradation, and that we were looking at farmers who are only putting, for example, high doses of fertilizer, but they are not putting the organic inputs like conservation agriculture or manure or other things. Those ones, there is a cost to that because the carbon sequestration is lost and some other benefits. But we did not look at the externalities of pollution and other things.
Thank you for the questions.
The microphone.
Regarding the relationship between government effectiveness and land degradation in India, what I think is that the relationship between these two variables, government effectiveness and land degradation, is very likely not linear. It's non-linear. So it makes a lot of positive impact when government effectiveness improves from low base to higher levels. But when it is relatively at higher levels, the impact could be much less. And then that map we need to also consider that this is a bivariate relationships. In our bigger framework, we have more variables. So we address some of the biases that may arise from omitting some of the important variables which may interact with government effectiveness. And that's why I also invite you to have a look in the Indian chapter, and if you have more questions, we can discuss this more. I also have something to add about negative externalities. In our mapping of land degradation hotspots in most developed countries, biggest share of degraded lands is those where land degradation is masked by excessive fertilizer use. So that you are very right in that sense. But we also need to, and of course, to address negative externalities, one of the standard economic approaches is the principle of polluter pays. But if you look at the developing countries, poor countries, the farmers who are already very poor, trying to apply that principle to them would not be very productive, because especially in terms of achieving poverty reduction, food security. So there we need to work more with incentive structures to address land degradation.
Dr. La?
Just very briefly about the pathways to degradation in developed versus developing economy. Soil erosion in Iowa, Midwest United States, fence-to-fence plowing, when the cost of corn went up to $7, $8 per bushel. In developing countries, on the other hand, it's the desperateness, it's the misery, it's the situation where they have to keep mining the land. And I think the two reasons are very different. I was very interested to read you had a light intensity in your book as a factor to see how that was related. So I think the affluence, and if I do not want to use the word greed, but on one side versus desperateness on the other side.
Thank you. There were some questions in the front row here. Ma'am, did you have a question? No? You had a question.
Priscilla Enriquez from the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture. Yes, I was wondering if you know of any studies done in the dry corridor of Central America that documents the land degradation. It's a very severe issue in that part of the world. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to know if they know about of any stories or recent documents or data from the dry corridor in Central America.
Ma'am, did you in the front?
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel. I am particularly pleased to have the opportunity to speak a word to Dr. Lal, because I had long hoped to meet you and missed a couple of times. But I think one of the things that all are needed are the two categories of people who have big influence but who are not very well informed about the kinds of things we're talking about here today. And that is climate scientists who are mostly chemists or physicists. There don't seem to be very many, if maybe no climate scientists who have experience or knowledge in agriculture. And the second category of people I think that need to be well informed are politicians, very senior politicians. So I would like to ask Dr. Lal if Governor Kasich is aware of his center, and whether, if he is, can you persuade him to speak up about it? Because we really need a White House lawn with some clover in it and not chemicals.
All right, thank you for the question. We'll take one more if there is any. Sorry.
Hi, my name is Tim Thomas, and I'm from IFPRI, and I really have appreciated all the panelists, and I mostly think about the economic side of things, but I also have a great interest in soil science. So it's a pleasure to have Dr. Lal speaking to us. And I wanted to pursue a little further. One of your slides, you had this threshold level that was a critical threshold level for degradation, beyond which the soil wasn't useful anymore. And so obviously soil erosion would be one of the items that would fit in that category if there was too much erosion. But I wanted to, first of all, ask if you could give other examples of those thresholds. And then second, in regard to that, thinking towards sort of industrial agriculture, say Iowa or Ohio even, maize, is that sustainable as is? Is there a critical threshold in that kind of situation? And if so, what is the nature of that?
Dr. Lal?
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm very pleased with what Secretary Kerry has been doing. He really advocated what he called climate smart agriculture. I'm not sure I agree with that use of the term. I would rather prefer climate resilient agriculture, and I can explain why. But at least he came out and said that many times. So I think that's a very plus part. That's the kind of message we need to convey at COP21 and hopefully next year COP22. Part of the blame why it is not known to politicians goes to people like myself. So I'm not going to blame anybody else except people who are like me, academic. And the reason is we always write in journal which our peer will read. We always talk to our peers in scientific conference. We have not really established contact with policymakers as much as we should. So the blame really is not on politicians. I'm going to say blame is on us. I definitely do not want Governor Kasich to think that, no, I think it's really, we have to step up our approach. We must communicate our results in a language that politicians will understand. That's a very important part. I think in terms of soil, I hope that we can have a curriculum on soil and what it does at primary school level and secondary school level. And that's very important. Translating into monetary term is very important part. I think the critical level of threshold, other examples are soil organic carbon. We know that 1.5% is required carbon in the root zone. Organic matter will be multiplied by 1.7. So right now, soils in India, which I'm very familiar with, South Asia, organic matter content of the Indo-Gangetic plains, where the problem of pollution and water quality is very seriously affecting human health, and issues of cancer have come up very badly, and is 0.01%, 0.05%. When I did my master's degrees in Punjab in 60s, it was 1.5%. Removal of all the crop residue, uncontrolled grazing, burning of biomass, not putting back the compost and using that as for cooking fuel has taken its toll. We have stalled the green revolution, if not come down. The same problem exists on threshold in sub-Saharan Africa, Sahel especially. The organic carbon content of 3% sometime after deforestation. In my experiment, after 15 years of cultivation and years, came down to 0.5%. Reversing that trend is very, very, very difficult. I think we must protect what we have. So organic carbon is one, rooting depth is another one. You need a minimum rooting depth, let's say 30 centimeter in some kind. 50 centimeter. Some soils after degradation, after plinthite formation, only 10 centimeter. So that's it. Once that happens, you reach that another form that you cannot reverse back. That's the extinct soil then. Another very good threshold value is available water capacity. You know, we talk about droughts. Drought is affecting Africa, and climate change is going to impact drought more seriously. That drought is available water capacity of the soil. So as soil degrades, its available water capacity keeps on decreasing. So you can grow corn, and if you cannot grow corn, go to sorghum. If you cannot grow sorghum, go to millet, go to teff. After a while, it's only shrub will grow. And that's a problem. So there are many thresholds. Now this is where the question is, what is the economic cost not to let the threshold go to irreversible level? That's a point which is very difficult to assess. And so there are many values. In fact, that's why I'm saying from the next book have to go a little more on that part. So I'm encouraging them to do book number 3.
Dr. Marzabayev?
I think there was a question about Central Asia.
Right.
Central America.
Central America, sorry. The guy behind you did a land degradation study in Honduras. John. yeah. And also our book is global, so we are doing the studies around the whole world, and we have data for every pixel in the world. So we also have that data, but there was one specific study that I know of, and it was done by John Pender. So, yeah.
Did you want to add anything?
Just to add to what Professor Lau said, it's very important to, I also agree to study the threshold or tipping points in soil, but also there are related tipping points in socioeconomic systems. Tipping points in socioeconomic systems which may be related to those thresholds in the soil, and there is a very great opportunity to look at them in a combined manner.
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay, great. So why don't we give 1 minute each to each panelist just to wrap up any closing statements that you might have? Or we could just, well, okay.
Maybe I can.
Okay, please.
I want to once again congratulate the editors to bringing this very serious problem to the knowledge of general public. I think you have done 2 books, great job.